I wrote a book called Fever House, which is a sort of horror crime novel that starts with two leg breakers in Portland, Oregon, who stumble upon a severed hand in one of their clients' homes. And proximity to the hand produces uncontrollable violence and madness in anyone in proximity to it. And they take the hand, and soon enough we discover that a government agency has actually lost it. It's part of this thing called the remnants, which are numerous body parts from this same being or person. And so they're on the hunt for it, and then it winds up in possession of this young man named Nick Coffin, who lives with his mother, Catherine Moriarty, who has become agoraphobic after the brutal suicide of her husband. And as you read the book, you start to discover that all of this disparate web of people are all intertwined. Everything is related to each other. The hand, the coffins, Moriarty, the agency, everybody.
I find myself doing this lately where when I first start out talking about the book, I'm actually not talking about the book. And if this is something that can't be part of the conversation, I totally understand. We can cut that. But at the very end of the advanced copy that I got, there was a placeholder for an excerpt for the next book. So how public is that? Something that's public knowledge that this is part of a series or there's a sequel or something?
Yeah, I've gotten the green light to mention it. It's going to come out. The sequel is going to come out in summer of 2024. The book is called The Devil by Name. And that's what I have about 26 days to finish and send off to my editor. So we're working hard on that right now.
Awesome. Well, first of all, congratulations.
Thank you very much.
Guess that's got to be kind of the goal, right? Is to keep momentum going. Like you have, someone was talking, I think it might've been Brian Keene one time I was talking to or something or listening to somewhere. And he was talking about like, when your job is writing, if you're just promoting the book that's coming out now and you're not working on the next book, you're falling behind. So I have to imagine that by the time you finished edits on this one, you were probably deep in the next one.
Yeah. And thankfully I have the one after this already written. And so we just need to work on edits for that and do some rewrites and stuff. So I'm a little bit ahead of the curve, but I mean, ideally, it's like I want to be, and so far the publishing company and my editor are down for this, but I want to be the guy with a book a year coming out.
Yeah,
but it's such a balancing act, like you said, of like promo stuff and writing and revising, and so it's really a tight wire act. But the coolest tight wire act there ever will be,
Totally. And I got to imagine that it can't be easy to really switch gears unless you're prone to promotion. I know some people just don't care for that part of it, but it's a necessary evil. You have to go on podcasts. You have to be on social media. Usually, you have to plan some sort of virtual or actual tour or something to do the promotion for it as well. So,
yeah. And it's, I love that stuff. I'm so not averse to it. The only challenge for me is when I get this cool opportunity for a blog post or an essay or whatever from this venue or that one, but it's so open-ended that they're just like, yeah, we don't really care too much what it is. Just give us something. And I'm like, oh God, that I find challenging.
Sure.
So
it's like you could start at anything.
Yeah. It's like, give me a bit of a theme or something and I can riff on it, but just such an open-ended thing, but stuff like this is such a luxury, it's such a privilege to be able to do this stuff. And, with the idea of like, wow, people may actually want to hear all of this stuff that I'm blathering about. So yippee.
Yeah. Good. Well, yeah, because I know some people just like it's agony,
right?
To do
it's painful, so, totally.
Yeah.
Yep.
So that's good to hear that you're not just writhing the entire time we're talking.
Totally. Yeah.
But one of the reasons that I wanted to start by talking about the planned sequel is that one of the things I noticed when reading the book, and I'm kind of going in reverse because I'm not talking about, I'm talking about things kind of in a weird order, but
Oh, that's
one of the
awesome.
things I noticed, one of the things I noticed about the book is how much detail we get about the different characters and backstory. And in my mind, I'm thinking, we're 80% into this book and I'm still getting origin information for characters. And I was
Yeah.
like, this is pretty unique. I wonder what the goal of this is. And then when I got to the very end of the arc and it was like there was the placeholder for the excerpt for the next thing, I was thinking, oh, he's doing some world building. He's creating
Yeah.
space for like the future story. And once I
Yeah.
saw that, like it was never a detractor. It was like it felt kind of luxurious almost. Like, I don't know if you're a Seinfeld fan, but like there was that one Seinfeld where Kramer adopted part of the highway and then he made the lanes wider, and it caused all this chaos. But like it kind
Uh-huh.
of felt like that. There was just a lot more room to live with these characters than I was expecting.
It
um, so yeah, it felt like once that tied it all together, I was like, oh, this makes perfect sense.
it was the coolest experience getting this book. Like, I got a new agent, Chad Louisville at Janklow and Nesbitt. Awesome guy. We worked on the book for a couple months prepping it, and then he's like, I got like 35 people that I'm going to send it to, but like I'm going to get 6 or 8 of them. I'm going to give them a couple days, like a first peek at it on like Thursday, and then we'll send the rest out on Monday. And he sent it out on Thursday. The next day, Caitlin McKenna at Random House emailed him and was like, "Oh my God, is there a sequel?" And she sent
Nice.
it with her team on Friday. And on Monday, she reached out to him and was like, "I want to set up a call with this dude." Tuesday, we had the phone call, and then Wednesday, we had the offer. And
Wow.
so it was like less than a week. And one of the things that she said was, uh, I want like 30,000 more words to this book,
Wow.
including like backstories and world building, like after the Fever House is kind of kickstarted, you know? So I don't know a lot of people who are like, here's this almost 100,000 word book. Just go crazy, dude. You know? It was so cool
Yeah.
to be like, you get more room to live in this place than less room, you know? So it was awesome.
Yeah. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I don't think I've been talking to authors about their books for almost 13 years now, and I think that's the first time someone was like, "Give me 30% more" or
Yeah.
whatever.
And I mean, she is so smart and so good at her job. And it's just like, it's one of those things where like, I just have, 99% of her suggestions I took, you know, and it's like, I just have a total belief that, she and Chad have just steered this book in the right direction, you know? So
Mhm.
yeah, it made the book way stronger, all that stuff. So
Definitely deeper, richer, more like
yeah,
identifying with the characters because it's not a small cast of characters. I wrote down the main kind of three groups of characters. There's what, six, seven, eight, like 10 main characters. So
yeah,
there's a
there's a
lot
shit
of
ton.
people.
And it's like, that can be a deterrent to a lot of people, like those big multi POV things, you know, and like the next one is even gnarlier, you know. So that's just, it's one of those things. It's no book is going to be for every person, you know, and so like if you like big sprawling multi POV books, then you will probably dig this one. But that's
Yeah.
again, not everybody likes books like that.
Well, yeah, that's a good point. But I think that there's a lot of like real big hooks that like pulled me into the book before I even started reading it. So first of all, we just got to talk about that cover because it is
Dude, yeah,
excellent.
Ella Latham made that cover. She um, knocked it out of the park, and it is so striking and like just in the colors, like the vibrancy of the
Yeah,
colors, like yeah, it's
yeah,
iconic, man. It's awesome.
yeah. It's one of those. I was thinking about it earlier because kind of the day of I talk to someone, I usually kind of prep some thoughts about it, and that's a book that people are going to buy just on the cover
Yeah, right.
alone, and
Yeah,
then decide later if they even want to read it. It's just such a
right.
good cover. which is a huge asset, you know. So
Yeah, it pops, man. It really pops. And like we were able to you know how they make the like buzz bags or boxes or whatever were like promo
Mhm.
boxes for reviewers and stuff. We were able to make t-shirts of the design.
Oh, nice.
And
Yeah,
so like, oh my gosh, it's just such a cool design, you know.
yeah, yeah. There's a yeah, you can really merch around that pretty
Mm.
easily, I think. Um, and I'm like, I'm happy to put it on my social media and stuff because like it's just yeah, like you said, it pops. So
Yeah, it's so
I think that's
she
a
she did such a good job.
yeah, yeah, it's great. And one of the things I've always been dumb about is I always forget to talk about book covers when I'm talking to the
Right.
authors because I'm so into the story. But this one, obviously,
And this
you just
was
have to
the
talk about it.
this was the first I've actually written like 3 novels and a story collection before this, and I've designed every one of my own covers before that. And this is the first
Mhm.
one where I've been like, okay, major publisher, they do their stuff their way, I'm out. And there was a lot of fear of giving that up, you know, that kind of
Yeah.
control. And then I'm just so stoked, you know, she did
Yep.
such a good job.
Yeah. Yeah. Big congrats on that. That was actually my original until I saw you talk about the cover somewhere online. My original thought was going to be to ask you if you had designed it because I know that you have a design kind of background. So
Right.
yeah. Um, the other kind of hook that I don't know if I read the synopsis online or what it was, but just the idea that like a severed hand that causes like a bunch of evil chaos.
Yeah.
Who doesn't want to find out more about
Yeah.
that? So like that's such an easy hook to get someone
Right.
in is like, what the hell is going on with his
Yeah.
hand? What is it? Why is it? Why does it exist? What does it do to people? Like what, so I think just that quick premise of being like, do you want to hear about like a severed hand that makes people do crazy things? And
Right.
who's not gonna want to do that?
Yeah.
So
And that
yeah,
was
that was a
actually
big hook.
the two like kind of focal points for Fever House were just this idea of a severed hand that drives you kind of like insane and violent if you're in any kind of sustained proximity to it. And this character, Hutch Holtz, who's kind of a leg
Hmm.
breaker for hire, who I have, he's been in other novels that I've tried to finish. And
Oh, cool.
just for whatever reason, though I shelved them and but he just kept coming back up. This character did again and again and again. So it was really like those two elements and then trying to build a backstory of like just what this hand is, you know. That was
Yeah.
really the two big impetuses, I guess, for the book, you know.
And I guess I'll talk kind of zoomed out before we dig into anything more specific. I was talking to Sadie Hartman, and she had recently read the book, and we were talking about her book that's coming out, where a list of horror books, and we were talking about categorizing books,
Hmm.
and she was saying that yours would be really difficult because there's so much going on because there's a crime element, there's drama, there's like a government agency kind of thing going on, but there's also like a really hardcore horror element.
Hmm.
So I guess the next thing I will acknowledge is that there's just a ton of stuff going on in this book, and it's not what I expected when I just kind of decided to sign up to read about an evil severed hand.
Right. And you know that every
So
single
yeah,
one of my books are like that, where they're hard to classify, you know, and they're just this weird ass amalgam of a bunch of stuff that I find interesting, and then I just shoehorn it all together into some hopefully cohesive narrative, you know. But like my novel Smoke City is about a drunk painter driving to his ex-wife's funeral, and he picks up a guy who is the remorseful reincarnation of Joan of Arc's executioner. And there's also ghosts everywhere, all throughout you know what I mean? So it's just,
yeah,
it's crazy and it's funny and heartbreaking and all this stuff. And but it's like, you know, how do you? What is that? Like, what the hell
yeah,
is that? And so we've, you know, kind of lucked into this like horror crime nexus for Fever House, but there's a ton of shit going on in there. You know, there's like
Yeah.
familial stuff with Catherine Moriarty and her son. Um, like you said, a bunch of like government black ops reports and stuff like that. So yeah, it's really, I just kind of like figure
An
out,
angel.
yeah, there's a possible like angel like thing. Yeah. I really just pick like 5 or 6 weird ass things and then shove them together and turn it into a book.
Yeah. Well, I think that it's well constructed. I think
Thank
they
you.
all kind of work together in a way that, because it starts off with the kind of hired muscle dudes encountering, it's ostensibly like a supernatural object that makes them feel violent. And so I'm thinking this is the course of the book. And then suddenly this secret agency kind of pops up because they're, the ones who need to contain the situation.
Right.
And that's really great. But then they have control of this, like maybe it's an angelic being who is trying to help them, not trying to, being kind of coerced to help them. And yeah, but then like there's this really strong rock and roll icon element to it with the Catherine Moriarty and Matthew Coffin and Nick Coffin, the whole family
Right.
who they had that famous band. So I'm thinking, does this guy, like, is he into all this stuff, or did he just do a ton of research for this? Because it all feels well lived in. So
Right.
like, what of this book is stuff that's familiar and stuff that you just decided it's in there, so I got to figure out how to talk about
Yeah, a lot. That's a really good question. And it comes back to like what we were chatting about a little bit before recording was some of the stuff you just learn enough and research enough to bullshit your way through the 10 pages you need or whatever, you know? I think the stuff with the blank letters, the band that's in the book, that stuff is all a lived experience for me in the sense that, like, you know, I'm an old punk, kind of cut my teeth on 90s punk. And then there was the whole like major label feeding frenzy around punk and alternative music back in the 90s. And that got very, in DIY punk and hardcore, that shit got very divisive. And seemed like a very big deal at the time, you know, given the kind of nature of the world and the record industry and all that shit. Now it seems a little quaint, but at the time it was like really important, you know. And so that kind of world of like a big band like that is definitely something that, you know, I cut my teeth on, just knowing about and being in that world for a long time. All that government ops shit, like that's all just made up. You know what I mean?
it.
Like the
Yeah.
number station stuff and all of that, like that's just me winging it, you know. But I
Yeah.
love that. I love, like with Smoke City, I had to research so much about what like French executioners were like, and I
Oh
learned
yeah,
like
yeah.
all these amazing things. And with The Mercy of the Tide, my first book, I had to learn a lot about like nuclear proliferation in the 80s. And so I'm not a college graduate. And so this notion of like, oh my gosh, I actually have the means to really buckle down and research something thoroughly and then transfer that knowledge somewhere is still such a blast for me, you know? And then I get to try to bullshit people with it, you know? Like it's so cool.
That is, and I'd imagine that would probably be pretty fun, figuring that kind of stuff out, and learning about it. But
Yeah.
I think that sometimes when you can tell when, I'm trying to think of the best way to say this because you do not do this, but you can tell when someone gets too focused on just the details or the information of the thing instead of how it enhances or whatever the story. So
Yeah.
like, I feel like sometimes you're reading something and you're like, they're like, I put in the time, I got to put all this information in
Yeah,
there instead
totally.
of being like,
Yep.
what of this helps the story move along.
Yeah.
So I feel like you did a good job of not over explaining or over indulging any of those
Yeah.
different kind of
And I
elements.
think I have my editor and agent to thank for that. You know what I mean? Because they like, particularly my editor, just really like tighten this thing up. You know what I mean? Because you get so close to something, you can't see it after a while.
Yeah.
You're just like,
Right.
oh, well, this 3 paragraphs about how it's actually transmitted. You really need that in there. You know what I mean? Stuff like that.
Right.
When you don't.
Right. Right. Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Or like
So I
a
can imagine
severed
that would be a
hand, like
challenge, but fun.
3 paragraphs describing what it looks like. And it's like, no, it's fucking gray and there's a little bit of bone sticking out. You're done. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? That sort of thing.
Done.
That's all you need.
Yeah. And then, yeah, because then you rely on the imagination of
Yeah,
the reader to paint the picture that, yeah, you're trying to kind of evoke or whatever. Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
And I definitely do. I
Um,
do write with a lot of detail. It is definitely a challenge to like dial that back. You know, I think I'm getting marginally better at it the more I write, but I still do. It's a challenge not to like front load shit or dump too much detail in.
well, as I was talking about before, when I kind of realized what was going on with the world building aspect of the book, um, juxtaposed with that is the fact that there's still a lot we don't know. I think when the book is done, there's still a lot that like I want to know more about,
Mhm.
and obviously I'm not going to point to specific things, but I don't know if that was restraint or like you had stuff planned already for the next book, but there was definitely like and I want to keep going kind of feel when I got done reading it.
Yeah, honestly, it was different when the book sold. It was different. Like I said, 30,000 less pages and all that, or words. But I did not necessarily plan on a sequel. Like it felt like even with that kind of up in the air ending, I'm like, that's it, man. But again, my editor was like, will you write a sequel for it? And she's like, you got a deal either way. You know what I mean? But like, I really would like you to write a sequel. What do you think? And so I said yes. You know what I mean? And so it's been a very unique challenge, very, very unique challenge writing the second book because, as you know, Fever House ends with a very particular set of constraints. You know what I mean? Like, it
Mm-hmm.
is not there are a lot of obstacles to get around the way that book ends. And there's a lot of like
Yeah.
things that you got to address even before the book starts. You know what I mean? In the sense that like it's not just like Portland on an average afternoon. Like shit happens in there that like you got to keep in mind when you're writing the sequel. I'm trying not to give
Right.
spoilers here, but you know what I'm talking about.
Right. Right. Right.
So yeah, it was a challenge.
Um, yeah. um, Talking about the book structurally, one thing I want to acknowledge is that it's POV chapters. So like every chapter is written from the perspective of a different character. And it's not necessarily like the same order. It's like whatever the story kind of
Yeah.
requires. But was it always that way, or did you have to kind of mold it into that? Because I feel like when you have a big cast like this, it is helpful to do that type of thing, where we know whose kind of experience we're looking at. We're not kind of blending those together in the middle of a chapter. So was it always going to be that way?
Yeah, definitely. It was always from the beginning a big multi-character, multi-POV thing. And just trying to like if I am not a plotter whatsoever, and so I really just wrote the book where like if the writing is going really well, I get the next little chapter or two kind of comes to me as I'm writing. So I'm like, oh, I know who's going to be next. I know what's going to happen with them. And occasionally I would get stuck and have to backtrack and then like kind of map things out a little bit. But it really was just meant to be like this really big, expansive thing with tons of characters. And I was really lucky because for the most part, the story just kind of clicked into place. There was no huge event where I had to backtrack and be like, oh, I got to step back 15,000 words and start over. It all kind of just
Right.
fell into place generally. And then I got to
Well,
add
that's good.
more after
Yeah.
the book was bought and everything. And I hope that answers your question.
Yeah. No, definitely. Because I've definitely we've all experienced it if we read books before. There's some times where there's not like a good enough kind of understanding of when things are changing from this character to this
Yeah.
character, and then I have to kind of do some mental kind of gymnastics to remember, okay, this is where we left this person,
Yeah.
and so like I feel like this structure makes it much more okay, now we're talking about this again, so now I know the storyline I'm thinking about. So yeah, I think it's helpful to kind of the fluidity of the situation.
Yeah, and I think that it was some of the critiques that I've heard is just that there is so many characters that it can be a challenge to keep track of. But I also think that as a writer, I hope that they are distinct enough characters and that the narrative is propulsive enough that like within like reading it really fast, you're like, oh yeah, that's where we are. Oh yeah, that's what this guy's doing.
Yeah.
Like it's not like
Yep.
there is definitely a in the kind of the character backstories, there's some navel gazing, and like this is how I came to be this shitty person or whatever. But for the most part, it's just you're just going from the beginning, and it's a
Yep.
big book, but it's like it reads fast.
Yeah, definitely. I will say to that point, there was only one time where I had to kind of like nudge myself about who a character
Yeah.
was, and it was Don, the character Don,
Mhm.
because there's a lot of time between when we see Don at one point and then when we come back to him,
Right.
and so much has happened
Yeah.
that I have to kind of remind myself who Don
Right.
was. But there's no way you could have like kept Don's story going in
Right.
the middle, like
Yeah.
so. Yeah, like that was the only time where I had that moment where I was like, "Wait,
Hmm.
okay," and but that's a function of the
Yeah,
story.
totally.
Like if you did
And
it any other
he,
way, you would have been like,
in his little his last chapter, he really helps kickstart the narrative again. So
"Yes." um, and so I think the next thing I'm interested in talking. There's two ways I want to go with this. Zombies.
is that what the book's about? Oh shit.
Is that something that we can talk about,
Yeah,
or is
that's
that
yeah,
too
absolutely. Yeah.
spoilery? Or okay,
So yeah, again, like all my books, it's like I've said this in other interviews and stuff. I got this big ass idea that I want to be a literary writer, right? And yet I grew up on GI Joes, Stephen King, uh comic books, and so I am like incapable of not infusing some kind of like supernatural thing or like a robot or something like that into my stuff. Um, so
yeah.
yeah, this is really just one of those like I just kind of picked a trope, and then this is what came out.
Well, I have a couple of thoughts about that. First of all, like it's not advertised in the beginning of the book that there's even like a reason we would think that it would go that
Yeah,
direction. And I don't know if you're like, there's an author named Christopher Moore, and he writes like satire kind of
yeah, he
stuff.
writes
And
all
he
the
has this
vampire
book.
books, right?
Yeah, yeah. He has those like San Francisco. They're funny. They're
Yeah.
humorous, kind of like. He's got a book called The Stupidest Angel, where, and I'm ruining this for anybody who hasn't read it, but is listening. He, it's like maybe 400 pages, 200, 300 and something pages, and he gets like almost 300 pages into the book before zombies appear. And I was like,
Right.
what? And it just blew my mind, but it was so great the way that like, the way that it happened. So it kind of had a little flash of, oh, I guess this is the direction we're going. And I didn't expect that, but the thing about it is it approaches the idea of zombies or some sort of like ravenous undead thing in a way that I don't, and I'm not an expert on zombies, but in a way that I'm not super familiar with, which is more of like a
Yeah, thank you. That was like
ancient evil kind of way
mhm.
or whatever, instead of like your contagion or whatever. So
Yeah, that was
kind of unique spin on it.
that was super intentional where it's not like necessarily science based or explainable by science. And that's something that is
Yeah.
addressed in the second book. Um, so yeah, it was like again just trying to take a trope like a ghost story with Smoke City or a monster in The Mercy of the Tide, and just there's a unicorn in Road 7, my other book, and just trying to take these
Hmm.
tropes and just entertain myself, you know what I mean? And like enjoy
Yeah.
it. But like I admire people like authors who can write about a failing marriage, you know what I mean? And do it like compellingly and beautifully. I just it doesn't hold my interest as a writer, and I just love writing about weird shit but running it through the lens of like heavy characterization, you know?
Sure.
So,
Yeah. Yeah. And
yeah,
I
zombie.
think, yeah, the the thing that they do in this book is, at least my impression as the reader, is kind of, I'm trying to think of the best way to say this. It helps people realize the um, consequences of actions a lot, because like, due to people doing shit, things get out of control, I guess, is like the carefulest way to
Yeah.
say it. So it does cause like characters to think about what they've done, what it means, like all that kind of stuff. So it does spin like a good kind of storytelling, like narrative. I'm not sure exactly what I'm trying to say, but it is not just for the sake of all the gore
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
violence that exists. It's like it's got more depth to
Yeah.
it than that.
And I mean, I like to think that it's very much, particularly with like the there's a rock star character named Matthew Coffin who is um arrogant and terrified and kind of a shitty guy, you know, who is kind of like trod through a bunch of people's lives, you know, with not a lot of consequence, and then he ultimately has this desire to like redo it and be a better person than he was, you know. And there are government agents and agencies who are just very much like might makes right. We fucking do what we
Yeah.
want because we can, you know. And so it's very much this exploration of like ambition, you know what I mean? And
Yeah.
just kind of stepping over people just to do it, you know what I mean? Just because like power feels absolute to a lot of people in this book. I hope that makes sense. You know, that's
Definitely.
kind of as far as an
No, yeah.
exploration. It's like it's really about ambition and power, you know.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. And in ways I probably didn't think about until you said that, but I definitely saw that from the government agency
Yeah.
side. But the Matthew Coffin side totally makes sense when you say it.
Yeah.
But then I think about, so John Bonner is a character.
Yeah,
Bonner
Bonner.
Bonner is a character who is of the agency, and he's had some recent kind of run-ins with making mistakes as a law enforcement agent,
Right.
and so he's kind of the other side of that coin, in a way, where he he did the thing that you would think the bad cops do,
Yeah.
but he's like legitimately haunted by it and stuff. So we get to see the other side of that ambition, which is like, I thought that's who I was, and once something bad happened, now like I'm kind of
Right.
lost.
But he still got political coverage, you know what I mean? And he still got rescued for it.
Right.
And so
Yeah, he's swimming in some
yeah,
privilege. So
absolutely. You know, and so he like his story is far from done in the second book, but like, yeah, he really, all things considered, makes out pretty well. You know what I mean? And has got like, his journey is not particularly done. We shall say for book two. You know, um,
right.
because yeah, he's like, uh, as far as the end of the book, like he's at fault as anyone is. You know, really. So,
Yep.
and
Yeah.
again, it's so fun to talk about this shit while being vague, you know? It's like
Yeah.
without trying to lay
Because
spoilers
we
out.
kind of know, we're
Yeah,
like,
totally. Wink wink, nudge nudge.
so yeah, there. I mean, we could dig into the other characters of the agency as well. That ARC agents,
Yeah.
ARC.
There you
Hey,
go,
ARC,
right.
ARC Party. That's my
Yeah.
podcast. Um, but there was something interesting. Well, the Lundy character, David Lundy, who's kind of the in charge of this clandestine situation, is kind of, I think, the large face of that ambition type of
Yeah.
thing. and then manipulating the Samantha Wiles character into doing his bidding in a way that manipulation was something that was really cool to read.
Yeah, and that again was very much that was all my editor being like, we need a backstory for her, because she can't. As it is now, she's just kind of a grouchy attack dog. You know what I mean? And so like we need some like
Right.
history as to why she's just this bullet for this guy. You know, so that was a lot of fun. It was really challenging, and again, it is another one of those tropes, like the like assassin who goes through the CIA farm and all that shit. You know, but it was so fun to write. Like that
Yep.
stuff is so fun to write.
Yeah.
Um, and so yeah, she was another one of those people who I hope we have a little bit of empathy for her at the end of it, even though like she's a pretty fucking brutal character on her own, you know. But she was kind of made that way to a
Yeah.
large degree.
Yeah, definitely. Like definitely led in
Right,
directions without maybe knowing she was being led in those
right.
directions. Yeah. One thing that we haven't really acknowledged about the book openly is that it's kind of brutal. Like there's like when you describe violence, you're not shy about it, my friend. And so like much like I was when I interviewed Philip Frakowski recently about his book Boys in the Valley, I was tempted to start the interview by just saying Jesus
Uh huh.
Christ, man. And so there's definitely a vein of that with this book too, where like I was really thinking the first impression is definitely like holy shit. And so I guess it's worth acknowledging. Like it gets pretty brutal in some
Yeah,
points.
and you know, I again, I just love trying to distill acts of violence down kind of as like graphically but also succinctly. Like you don't have to talk again about 3 paragraphs about blood running down a face, you know? Like you can like do it through dialogue half the time or whatever, you know? Like there's a scene where a guy
Yeah.
pulls his own tooth out and is like, "You're going to knock my teeth out? Fuck you." You know what I mean? Like stuff like that. Like
Yeah.
you can do things like that without having to fall into the trap of like page after page or paragraph after paragraph of it. And I do that
Right.
occasionally, you know what I mean? But I also hope that it punctuates the gore versus like just an unending, page after page of it. But yeah, that shit's fun to write,
Right.
man.
The page after page thing, I call it the
Uh
Anne Rice
huh.
problem because I like in the little Anne Rice I've ever read, she'll spend three pages talking about like an
Right, right,
armoire or
right.
something.
Totally. Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I think the example that comes to mind, and I think it comes to mind because it just stuck with me early into the what the hell's going on kind of phase of the book. They're at a medical examiner's office or something, and the first person that they see has no face or something, and like that's what like one of them says, like she doesn't have
Yeah.
a
Right.
face
Right.
or they don't have a face or something like that, and I'm like, well,
Yeah.
that's all I need
Totally.
to know.
Yeah.
Like the picture is starkly in
Right.
my mind, so yeah, that's definitely an effective way
Yeah.
to
Yeah,
go.
they're it's the two ARC agents kind of talking to each other as they're watching this person shamble out of the medical examiner's office. And it's again, it's just stuff like that, you know.
Yeah.
I like this is definitely the most horror heavy, like horror specific book that I've written. Um, and again, it's still a weird amalgamation of like crime and other stuff, but yeah, that stuff is like uh, such a treat when you get to like dip into the
Yeah.
like icky parts, you know? It's so fun. Like,
Yeah.
people's talking or why they're doing this. Bug, give me more eyeballs popping out, please.
Horror belongs everywhere if you ask me. So like horror, it is horror exists kind of everywhere in our lives, and so I think that's kind of where it belongs in writing too.
Mm-hmm.
So mixed in with crime elements or spy thriller elements and stuff, it seems totally natural to me because horror kind of permeates everything in a way. I was talking to someone who was like kind of confused why romance in a bookstore would be next to horror, and to me, I'm like that totally
Yeah.
makes sense because they're both evoking these like strong feelings. They're just different kinds of feelings. So yeah, I feel like yeah, horror belongs in wherever it can find itself.
Yeah, and it's one of those things where like again, this is the first one where I would say it's like very uh central to the book. And so I think my other shit is more like kind of moored in like magical realism or literary fiction, And so this is
Mhm.
it was a cool opportunity for me to just go like full tilt into it. And so and then to try to kind of sustain that same tone in book 2 is going to be interesting. You know what I mean? Has been definitely challenging to
Yeah.
be like it needs to be as like bada 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 as the first one was, propulsive. So
Yeah.
yeah,
That makes sense. Well, I think it's the right time to throw some horror elements into your book as far as like popularity of the genre
yeah,
goes,
right,
because I think you acknowledge, I don't know if you acknowledged it on the conversation or before we started recording, but there's definitely a moment happening right now.
yeah, and
So
it's
that's such an inclusive
yeah,
community. Like they really
and
embrace the
that was
people.
we had mentioned Sadie Hartman. That's one of the things that I really appreciated about her compendium that she put out, or that is being published, because it's all shit from the past 20 years, and in many
Yep.
cases the
Yeah.
past 2 or 3 years. So a
Yep.
focus on like it's not just about the lottery or Amityville horror or Stephen King's novels or whatever. Like there's so much amazing stuff being put out like this week. That's incredible.
Yeah. Yeah. Yep. Yeah. It's very good, and there's yeah, it's definitely something that's going to be helpful for a
Yeah,
lot of people. Just kind of because I was that way before I was, you know, podcasting. I had like the handful of authors that I knew that I liked, and then I didn't know how to
totally.
find other
And
ones.
it can
So
just be so
just help.
overwhelming. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely. Talking about influences of the book, before I ask you if there were specific influences for the horror elements, I'm going to tell you a couple of books or authors that spring to mind with some of the
Okay.
elements of the book. And the first one is Richard Lehman's One Rainy Night. I don't
Heard
know
of
if you're
him, haven't
familiar.
read him.
So his so One Rainy Night is, so he's
Yeah.
just crazy. He was a crazy horror author, but like that book, the basic premise is one night for no explained reason, it starts raining this black liquid, and anybody who gets touched by it goes completely insane and murderous. And so like it's basically the moment people start getting rained on, it's just
Yeah.
we got to
Right.
survive. And so that book came to mind for
Yeah.
reasons in regards to this book. But then like in general, kind of a Jonathan Mayberry. I don't know if you're too familiar with Jonathan Mayberry, but and the reason is like his books definitely have kind of like a horror supernatural
Mhm.
element to them, but also look at things sometimes from more of like a military government
Okay.
agency. Like we understand that these things are in the world, and there's like there's a governmental reaction
Yeah.
to them. So that was someone who kind of came to mind as well. So I didn't know if there was anything there, but it sounds
Zero
like
for two
no.
so far.
But here's the thing: anybody who's reading or listening or watching this, if those things are something that you're into, I feel like you would find something in this book that that speaks
Yeah.
to you. So that would be a good kind of comparison or recommendation if like you're into that kind of one rainy night situation, or like Jonathan Mayberry's kind of approach with like the military elements of things. I think that there's a good
All
crossover
right.
there.
I'll take it.
That being said, did you have any specific influences for this story, or do you not really work in that
You
way?
know, it's such a trip. I don't think I take on anything willfully. Um I do think there are writers uh that I kind of take on uh unintentionally, you know what I mean? I think that like, stuff like Kelly Link's like world building is just insane. She's so good at it. She's unstoppable at it. Um and like Andy Davidson's In the Valley of the Sun was a huge influence. Richard Lang's Rovers, which was again a vampire novel, but set with this like kind of ageless like biker gang, and just this pitch perfect like merging of crime and horror, you know. So that was a big one that as
Nice.
I was reading it and writing Fever House, I was like, my God, it can be done. You know what I mean? Um, and there was a one of my earliest when I first started reading as a young man in my early 20s, started reading like just for the joy of it outside of like horror stuff and all that. Read this guy named Michael Doane, um, who's kind of a literary, uh, kind of macho literary guy who did like I think 5 novels throughout the 80s and early 90s, and I just devoured his stuff so much. And so this notion of like, there's a book about a spy agency who works with like the World Health Organization and stuff in the 80s uh, called City of Light. And I'm rereading that right now. And it just reminds me of like that merging of like genre fiction and literary stuff where you can have expansive characters, but still kind of play around with tropes is like, that's what I want to do, you know? And so those, I think stuff like that, where you show me genre stuff, but you make it like about the people inside the book. That's what I want to read, and that's what I want to write.
I think that, and this has kind of been coming up in conversation a lot um, recently. I love when I get to know a character and kind of live in their life a little bit, and a story is kind of fills out characters well and is deeper and in depth and everything, and what you did. Um, but I have to, like, in my mind, remind myself sometimes it's okay to just read something
Oh yeah,
entertaining, like that one Rainy Night book I mentioned, the Richard Lehman book. There's not a ton of character development because everybody's just dying and
right,
murdering. So like,
yeah,
there's a purpose to that book, and it can be that, and that's fine. But I find myself, first of all, like kind of gravitating more toward the like character driven stories, um, and things like that. But they're also more fun to
yeah,
talk about. I think there's more there to kind of explore
yeah.
too.
And I'm reading
So
Nick Harkaway's Titanium Noir.
that's a. I think I've seen the cover for that. I think
It's
it's a
awesome.
pretty
It's
good
such a
looking
good
cover.
cover.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
But so he's another guy that does like like Tiger Man is essentially a superhero story, you know, about this guy who dresses up as a superhero on this totally fictionalized island. I believe a fictionalized island. And, but he's another guy that plays with tropes. This one is like a crime one and like sci-fi smushed together. Uh, and he does this thing where it's like he's able to tell you so much backstory or like the way these two characters relate to each other just in a line or two, you know, because he's just
yeah,
able, like, he's that good of a wordsmith, you know, where it doesn't take a paragraph or a page. It's like a line or two, you know?
yeah. That's that's incredible talent. And one of the, all right, so that reminds me of something that's come up recently is that sometimes when it's so effortlessly done, you don't recognize the talent that it takes to make it that way.
Yeah.
There's an author named Craig Clevenger who's like traditionally like he's a crime writer, and he's a buddy of mine, and he just had a book come out. And one of the things that like people who get it kind of talk about is his books are so easy to read because he does such a good job of crafting the story and the narrative and stuff that you don't realize how much work it probably took to get to
Yeah.
that point. So like, I like to recognize when that is done well, that it had to be fucking hard
Just
to do
edit
that.
after edit after edit, you know?
Yep.
What's his new one,
Yeah.
by the way?
It's called Mother Howl.
Okay. Yeah. I definitely want
Yeah.
to read that one.
Yeah. He's just one of my favorite as far as like being, um, just a talented writer. He's up there with some of my favorites. But yeah,
Yeah.
his first book, Contortionist Handbook, is just. I mean, it came out in the mid 2000s, I think. So it's got some age on it, but that book is just it stands up. It's timeless,
Right on.
and it's pretty quick. It's like under 200 pages, I think. But
Yeah.
if anybody wants to read just a book that's just unassailably like perfect when it comes to like the writing style, like that's that guy. he's hard to touch.
Yeah, right on.
But I think he gets overlooked as far as that talent goes because it's just like, yeah, it was a great story, but
Hmm.
you don't think if you don't think about it deeper, you don't realize how hard that kind of thing is. So that's
Right.
kind of what you made me think about when you were saying
Yeah,
that.
totally. Yep.
Yeah. So bringing it back around to Fever House in general, first of all, and I never, I'm always so bad about this, but I just want to acknowledge that I really enjoyed the book, and
Thank
it's
you.
a weighty, it's a heavy book. It's I think almost 450 pages,
Yeah.
but you managed to pace it in a way where um, it doesn't feel that big. And then also one of the things I'm going to go back to acknowledging the POV chapters thing. Um, because we get to see what's going on with these characters in a chapter and then we go to someone else and everything. If I was looking at the chapter list, if I saw someone was coming up, I'm like, ooh, I wonder what's going on there. Like
Right.
I was using the chapter list as a way to be like, huh, I wonder where this is going. So,
Yeah.
yeah, it definitely paces well for such a big book. So,
And
I appreciate
that
that.
was
And,
it was definitely intentional with like, crime novels and stuff where it's like a lot of try to end on a cliffhanger as much as possible, Um
okay. Yeah.
and so it was like really intentional to even on long ass chapters, and there are some long ones in there. Some of them are a page and then some of them are, 40 pages. Usually they're like 6 or 7 pages, but it's just to try to end on some kind of like ooh, like
Yep.
kind of explosive moment or like potential for what's going to happen next.
Very successful. Definitely.
Yeah, and that's
Definitely
like you
successful.
trying to sustain that in the second one again is like
Yeah.
you don't want to make a copy of the first book, but definitely like uh, certain benchmarks should be met. And so it's been really challenging to kind of toe that line. Um,
Yeah.
so yeah.
Yeah. I can imagine. And then, kind of a final thought that I had because of what we were just saying. For the most part, it's a pretty traditionally told story, but there are some elements that are a bit different. So there's like news articles, and like you had mentioned, government agency reports, and then at one point there's actually song lyrics. So reading the song lyrics, reading the news article, I was thinking if I didn't have experience in that type of writing, I would find that immensely challenging. So I'm wondering if that was part of the book that was easy for you to write, or was it a little bit more challenging?
I actually I was in a shitty band, and I was able to poach some of my own lyrics. Um,
Oh, right on.
for that song. Yeah. Not all of them, but like I think maybe a stanza or two. And then that actually also there's like a Rolling Stone article in there, I think.
Yeah.
Um, was again one of Caitlin's requests that kind of like we hear some history of the band and their dynamics through like an actual like music interview at their height. And so
Yep.
I love shit like that. You know what I mean? It's so fun and it lends like such an air of like weird veiled legitimacy to it, like, oh, it's a real band. I love they're like little Easter eggs, man. I love those things. So it
Yeah.
was fun to write.
Yeah. Good. Pulled off well. So I was like, man, to me, that would be like the thing that would stop me. Like, it would be
Right.
like, well, we have to push the release back because I have to figure out how to fucking do this.
Yeah. And just like writing the like transcripts of all the government reports and like figuring out how classified documents are like laid out. Like, oh, that's all nerd shit. I love it. It's so fun.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
To honor the time we have together, I'm just going to wrap it up. I want to say, I want to re-acknowledge. So the release date is when for Fever House?
August 15th.
August 15th. So it's coming up. I think that again, I love the book and it's a great ride. So pre-order it. I saw somewhere, and I will link to this, that you have a specific bookstore that's doing handling your like signed pre-orders. Is
Yeah,
that right?
Broadway Books in Portland, Oregon. I think it's broadwaybooks.net.
Cool.
Are going to handle all the signed and inscripted books. So if you don't catch me at like an event, that's the best way to get a signed or personalized copy. And you can
Yeah.
call
And
them.
then we're supporting.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're supporting independent
Yeah, they're
bookstores who are doing assigned
fantastic.
books. So
Awesome
yeah,
bookstore. So,
usually like I have a normal link that I send or that I have
yeah,
for pre-orders. Like, but if there's a store you're coordinating with, I like to push that because
that I'm sure they'd
a
appreciate it. Right on.
you're getting more, as a reader, you're getting something extra. as a reader, you're also supporting an independent bookstore.
Yeah.
So I'll link to that primarily
Awesome. I
for this.
appreciate it, dude.
But hey, I want to thank you so much for taking some time. We've never met before, so I know it's kind of a gamble. Like, is this even going to be,
Yeah.
is this guy
Right.
going to be a jerk or whatever?
Yeah.
So I appreciate you taking the time to talk to me, and I always want to thank the author for giving me something entertaining. So I really appreciate the time you put into making such a great story for us to all read.
I really appreciate you being a awesome reader and taking the time to like have me on here and be like, what the hell am I gonna ask this guy? Like, I really appreciate it. It's you know uh doing all this stuff is a total privilege, so I really appreciate it.